Welcome to the National Council of Negro Women's 59th Annual Convention, National Convention, Dialogue on Racial Justice and Criminal Justice Reform. I am Davita Mathis, your moderator. I am a proud member of NCNW, the Greenville, South Carolina section. I'm an attorney. I have been a prosecutor as my first job as an attorney. And I am especially happy to welcome our esteemed guests this evening. Our guests are Marilyn Mosby, the 25th State's Attorney of Baltimore City, and the Honorable Keith Ellison, the 30th Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. I'd like to thank Dr. Janetta B. Cole for allowing me to participate in this dialogue. I am, first of all, a law geek and law fan. And so it is a high privilege for me to be in the company of these illustrious attorneys. I also would like to thank Janice Mathis, the Executive Director of NCNW, and all of the staff of NCNW, along with the board of NCNW, for even allowing this dialogue to take place during their convention. We've been talking about racial justice and criminal justice reform in our communities ever since African Americans have been in the United States of America. It's been top on our agenda from the beginning. But what is new and what is different in 2020 is that the issues of racial justice and criminal justice reform are at the top of the agendas of people all over the world. We have talked about the multiple killings of African American men and women, boys and girls by police, unjustified, according to many of us. We've talked about it for years, a string that's so long we can't talk about all of them and call their names. But we know that it's been happening for years and things have not changed a lot for us in that regard. But the new focus on criminal justice reform and racial justice has taken many of us by surprise. On the backdrop of a historic pandemic, we were all forced to watch on television, seemingly live over and over and over again, the killing of George Floyd. And the world watched. It seemed like it was orchestrated by a divine force, that we were all forced to be at home and all forced to watch TV and to see a man be executed on television. So many of these killings have taken place either by video or in live video that we've had to watch and endure. We've become numb to so many of them. But our two guests this evening have been at the intersection of history, of our history as African people, as our history as American people, and in the history of criminal justice and criminal justice reform. Even racial justice, justice for all Americans. And we are so honored to have you. I can't think of anyone else that I'd rather speak to on these issues tonight. And so I thank you for being present. And I won't prolong this conversation because I want to get to our speakers. We will hear from our spotlight speaker, Keith Ellison first, and the Honorable Marilyn Mosby. Keith Ellison is the 30th Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. He was sworn in January 7, 2019. Prior to that, 2007 through 2019, he was a United States Congressman representing the 5th Congressional District of Minnesota. He seems to be at the precipice of history at all times, because in 2007, when he went to Congress, he served on the House Financial Services Committee, where it was his duty to oversee the housing industry, the financial services industry, and Wall Street. It seems like a lifetime ago, but in 2007, this country was experiencing a historic decline in Wall Street, also the bursting of a bubble in the housing industry, and those were the areas that he focused on. Prior to that, he served in the Minnesota House of Representatives, and he served as an attorney, specializing in civil rights and defense law. A graduate of University of Minnesota School of Law, 1990, and the father of 4 adult children, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Elijah, and Amira. And I understand Jeremiah is in politics as well. He is the first African American and first Muslim American to serve as a statewide elected official in Minnesota. And so without any further delay, the Honorable Keith Ellison.
Good evening, everybody, and what a pleasure and an honor it is. I have such tremendous esteem for your organization. I just consider you to be a great inspiration to me, and I thank you for inviting me today. I think we're at a historic inflection point. We're at a moment in time when we meet the moment, we could change things for the better for our children, grandchildren, and people to come. And if we don't meet the moment, things can get worse. The fact of the matter is that there is no guarantee that we're on some linear line of progress. There's no guarantee. If you were to be back in 1868, you would think, wow, things are getting better for us. We just got out of slavery. That's great. And, we're getting the amendments passed, 13th, 14th, and 15th. 15 hadn't even been passed in 68. Things are getting better. I think things will get better. And yet by 1900, the increase in Black folks in the Congress had topped out and ended. The Black Caucus I was a part of was not the first Black Caucus. There was one during the Reconstruction period. And by 1900, there was none. And by 1919, there was a period we called the nadir, which is a low point in African-American history where they were lynching us one every 3 or 4 days, including in Duluth, Minnesota in 1920. And all of you know all about Tulsa and you know about Rosette. And yet we had this other Reconstruction that started in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. And it looks like now Trump looks a lot like some of those leaders in the late 19th century who just didn't want to see any increase in the rights of Black folks or anybody else, and led a period of retrenchment. We're not going back to retrenchment. I don't think you're willing to go back, but it is critical that at this moment of inflection, we understand the time, we understand the moment, and we understand what we must do. And we commit to resolving that we will only fight for progress for our people. And if we fight for progress for our people, then that's going to be progress for everybody. So let me start by saying this inflection point, you cannot just say, oh, the murder of George Floyd. As you said so eloquently, we have been seeing excessive force result in the death of Black people for quite a long time. And what we have seen is that despite what seems to be the most clear case of liability, responsibility, guilt, it seems that it's extremely hard to hold these people accountable. That, impunity is how I might use one word to characterize police use of force against Black people, that they just used deadly force against George Floyd. I think the real problem is more typified by Amy Cooper. You all know Amy Cooper. Amy Cooper is the woman who said that a Black man was gonna harm her and her dog, as that Black man was doing nothing but doing bird watching. I didn't even know brothers did bird watching. I'm proud to see there's one. And he's just bird watching, and she's gonna, it's Amy Cooper who's sitting on the jury. Who's sitting on the jury? Who are the social workers who make decisions about out-of-home placement for Black people? Who are the loan officers who say, will I extend a mortgage of us on the bottom, them on top? What do we do about it? In a word, we've got to continue to press for justice, to point out the wrong, to insist on fair treatment, to make America live up to its promise that all men and women are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is what we have to continue to do. We got to use creativity. We got to use all types of tools to do it, but we must do it, because if we don't, we have history to look back on. And the history in the first Reconstruction ended up in a very dismal period in Black history. And with this guy in the White House, I'm worried. So can I see the first slide, please? Yeah, so the first slide is getting to the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is we've got to organize and agitate for justice. That's really the heart of the matter. But before I get to what we do, let me talk just a little bit about the situation, just so we're clear on what we're talking about. Second slide, please. Now, this slide just goes to show how frequently African-American women engage criminal justice system. If you look at the numbers and you look at the graphs, we often talk about Black men in the criminal justice system, Black men being arrested, Black men this, Black men that. You know what? Black women are dramatically overrepresented in the criminal justice system. I think we've got to change our rhetoric. We've got to talk about Black people being overrepresented in the criminal justice system, having excessive force used against them, having sentencing be extreme. It is true that more Black men are arrested involved in the criminal justice system, but not by a dramatic number. In fact, Black women are more often treated like white men in terms of the criminal justice system rather than white women. Roll slide, next slide. On my screen, it's very small, so it's hard for me to really see, but please, to the next slide. If you could put, they don't need to look at me. If you can have the slide be the full screen, that'd be a lot easier for me. Can anybody do that? Okay, so here, there are about 1.3 million women under supervision of the criminal justice system. If you look at the numbers for Black women, they are dramatically, they're dramatically higher. But, prison, jail, if you look here, on probation, parole, most are on probation and parole, but the numbers are, in fact, dramatic. But let me just say this about probation. A lot of Black women who are on probation, they can't vote. They can't get into public housing. Their economic lives are dramatically changed, and their citizenship rights are dramatically changed. Next slide. So we have seen a decline in the rate of imprisonment of Black women between 2000 2017, but Black women are still incarcerated at twice the rate as white women. So it's still dramatic. Next slide. Yeah, and it's also important to understand that Black women who find themselves in the incarceration system are often victims of abuse. And I wanted to bring this slide up because, State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby is a prosecutor, and she will tell you that yes, Black people are over-policed, but they're also underprotected. And often African Americans are crime victims and nobody's held accountable for it. And this perpetuates suffering and pain. And sometimes I talk to African American law students and they say, well, how come you want to be a Black prosecutor? You're just throwing your own in jail. I'm like, wait a minute, my own is suffering from domestic violence, sexual assault, and all kinds of things. This is debilitating, injurious to the health and welfare of Black women. Black trans women are also often significantly abused before they ever hit the system. And let me note that if you look at about 80% of women prisoners suffer from substance abuse. A lot of that is just self-medication, trying to deal with the pain that they have gone through as girls and women. So let me tell you, chemical health treatment is Black folks' business, and Black crime victims need our attention, not just defendants. And again, I was a defender longer than I was a prosecutor. I think we need to be concerned about both. Next slide. Yeah, so incarcerated girls are disproportionately arrested for running away, accounting for 59% of runaways. They're often fleeing home from violent home situations, and not just violent home situations. We're talking about sexual assault, abuse, and rape, and it's far more acute for Black girls. African-American girls are 3.5 times as likely to find themselves incarcerated as white girls. Next slide. Yeah, and this again, this is talking about police stops. Women are being stopped by the police. They're being stopped on the street, traffic stops. Men do hit more, but not by any means by some dramatic margin. It is women are involved in the criminal justice system, and yet I can assure you that they don't have the same number of prisons. The ones that they have to go to are further away from their families. The ones that they have women are often the primary caregivers for their children, and they are rarely accommodated in that way. Women who go to prison are often dealing with not only incarceration, but they're dealing with separation and also child protection. And men are parents too, but they're not dealing with that child protection case nearly as much as women are. Next slide. Yeah, so Black women were about 7 times more likely to be involved in police-initiated traffic stops than white women. Black women are at least as likely as white men to be arrested during a traffic stop. So, I mean, I think it's ironic that yes, Black men get the harsh brunt of the criminal justice system, but Black women catch it too. In fact, Black women are treated like white men as opposed to white women who get the least amount of contact in the criminal justice system when it comes to officer-involved stops. And yet there's a lot of statistics that show that when it comes to crimes like shoplifting, check writing, and a lot of others, that actually white women have higher rates than Black women do. And yet Black women get arrested more. Next slide. Police use of force. Again, Black women actually experience a use of force during a stop about the same rate as white men, while white women use it significantly less. Sandra Bland is not an unusual thing. Black women often are the target of discriminatory stops. And this is an issue that we must address. We've got to disabuse ourselves of the idea that this is only Black men. Next slide. And by the way, thank you for your assistance with the slide. But I don't want to just stop. I want to talk a little bit about my own state, just as a case study, but I think you should look at your state. It'd be interesting to see every single state. And we should grab this data and share it with people. Next slide, please. So, we're talking about criminal justice, but I think it's impossible to discuss criminal justice without talking about housing. Why? Because if you have, well, let's just start with COVID, right? How can you shelter in place if you got no shelter, period, right? And let's move on from there, that if you're unhoused or unstably housed, we know that everything gets worse for the family. We know that Black children have worse test scores if they're unstably housed. We know that you're more involved in the criminal justice system. We know your health is going to be more at risk. You're more at risk to mold. You're more at risk to lead poisoning. You're more at risk to nearly every medical problem. Housing is a civil rights issue. We've got to top line this. This is a very big deal. My own state of Minnesota does about as bad as anybody when it comes to Black home ownership. In fact, Minneapolis, city of, has the largest gap between Black and white home ownership in the United States. And I can tell you this, don't think that what happened to George Floyd or Philando Castile or Jamar Clark or a lot of others is unrelated to housing. The fact is, if they residentially segregate you in one neighborhood, as they've done here, and then you have lower quality housing and you're more unstably housed, you're going to get more police attention. Some sociologist has to do the correlation between segregated housing and excessive force. I bet you there's a clear line there. I can't say that I know the line, but it's there, and that's my anecdotal experience. Next line. Again, the state of Minnesota as a whole, second largest income inequality gap. Poverty among whites in Minnesota is about 7%, while the rate is 4 times higher at 28% for African Americans. 33% of all Black kids, compared to 6% of white kids, are in poverty. So if you're a Black child in Minnesota, 1, 2, 3, that one's poor. 1, 2, 3, that one's in poverty. 1, 2, 3, that one's in poverty. That's the reality. The way the police deal with our community and the way that we deal with and the way where we're situated in the economy are very tightly correlated. Next slide, please. Education, same. I won't bore you with these statistics, they're there, but as I said, poor housing outcomes leads to poor educational outcomes. If we talk a lot about the gap between white and black students. Well, that's an important gap to pay attention to. Pay attention to this gap, the gap between safely housed students and unhoused students. And you will see even a more dramatic gap. I would submit to you that much of the racial gap in learning and education is explained by poor housing. And so we really need to dig into that. When Trump says we're not going to let low-income housing in your neighborhood to try to get white suburban votes, he's essentially promoting racial residential segregation. He's promoting fewer job opportunities and lower test scores for your kids. That's what's going on right there. Next. Healthcare, same. Black women, are 1.5 times, and American Indian mothers are 7.8 times more likely to die in pregnancy. I can tell you, I don't know about the states y'all come from. There's about 7 tribal nations in Minnesota, and I can tell you that the way Native people are treated in this state is abysmal. And a lot of Black folks have, Native American relatives and history, and so that's also something I think we should have some sort of a concern about. But those are just some of the numbers. If you're sick, you can't work. If you're sick, you can't go to school. If you're sick, everything gets tougher to do, and illness is a driver when it comes to impoverishment, and being poor means you're going to have more police contacts. Next slide, please. So look, people like me come on to meetings like this and talk about how bad stuff is all the time. I know you're tired of it. I just think that we need to just make sure that we have a clear-eyed view of what we're facing. In my own state of Minnesota, I want to talk about some solutions, but I know that most of y'all are not from Minnesota, so I offer this to you as kind of a case study, because whether you're in Maryland or Georgia or California, I guarantee you the numbers might be a little different. They ain't that much different. So next slide. So one of the things that I did as Attorney General, let me just say this before I say that. Look, in 1968, there were about 3 or 4 Black members of Congress. Now there's about 43 or 4. It makes no sense for us to increase our participation in American politics and not impact the outcome. We don't need a Black Attorney General in Minnesota if all I'm going to do is duplicate what the last guys did. We need somebody who's going to be more attentive to justice, more sensitive to injustice, and to do something about it. All I can say is this. I'm not the only Black Attorney General. There are at least 6 others. One of them is in Kentucky.
Well, say that.
I'm embarrassed. And he's over here acting like, oh, well, I'm just doing my job. Well, it depends on what you call your job, see? Because being Attorney General is the chief law officer of the state whose job it is to promote the public interest and make sure there's fairness in the state. Just like Maryland's job is to make sure there is justice in her county. And it's up to the jury and the judges what happens in some of these cases. Right. But she will not be found not fighting for justice. And that's why I'm a fan of your sister, because you can't always decide, you can't control what the final outcome of something's gonna be, but you can control what you're gonna do.
That's right.
And what we're gonna do is say that we're always gonna stand up for what's right. That song, the Black National Anthem, anybody ever heard of it? Lest ye, we are drunk with the wine of the world and we forget thee. Right? I might have screwed that line up.
No, you said it right.
But y'all know what I'm talking about. What does that mean? That means, wait a minute. Y'all don't have to eat, dandelion greens and chitlins no more. And you got nice, fancy college degrees. And you don't think that you got to fight for justice no more because your individual situation has gotten better. right? Why did our people lay down their lives, man? Why did they die? Why did they face the dogs and the water holes just for you to have a nice bank account and a fancy law degree
Well,
and a nice house and a car and some consumer items? To hell with those consumer items. We're in this for the fight for justice. And I'm not trying to lift my people above anybody, but I'm damn sure not gonna let them be below anybody. We're fighting for justice in this society. So let me just tell you, solution-wise, when it comes to policing, before the world knew who George Floyd was, I'm talking about last year, 2019, myself and the Commissioner of Public Safety, a Black man by the name of John Harrington, the chief public safety official in our state. I'm the chief law officer, but he runs, the state troopers and all that stuff. We jointly came together and we said, look, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna have a commission on reducing deadly force encounters with the police. Now, I'll tell you, some of my friends who are some of my friends who are absolutely intolerant of injustice, they were wondering whether an attorney general commission on reducing deadly force encounters with the police was going to bring forth any change. And they did what they supposed to do. They agitated and they pushed me. No sincere politician should be mad that people agitate them, write them letters, come to their meeting, make sure that they're doing the right thing. That's how we stay right, that we engage our community and we listen. And those folks came, we pulled together a commission. We had Black folks, white folks, Native American folks, we had Latino people, we had people from East Africa. We got a large Somali community here, and we had them all on the commission. We had police officers, we had prosecutors, we had the ACLU, and we came up with, we had hearings all over the state of Minnesota, and we came up with key recommendations on investigation, oversight, accountability, prevention, training, and officer wellness. It was important to talk about officer wellness because if you're burnt out on the job, we don't need you going back to deal with people who are in the midst of a crisis, right? So that is important. Prevention, training, policy, and legal implications like the deadly force policy, chokehold policy, all that, community healing and mental health. We did these things last year. Before George Floyd was killed, we did these things. And we came up with this and we issued our report and that came out. Next slide, please. We have another slide left? Yeah, key findings, 60% of deadly force encounters occur in greater Minnesota. Everybody thinks, oh, this is Minneapolis, St. Paul. No, this is in all around the state where these problems are happening, not just in the Twin Cities. And here's another thing, 50% of deadly force encounters with police involve someone experiencing a mental health crisis. So we said, look, if the person making the call says he's not right, he's out of his mind, he's got autism, something like that, that information should get sent also to a dual responding mental health crisis team along with the police so that we can try to make sure everybody lives. Even if the person committed a crime or even, no matter what, let's live. So next thing, and I'm gonna wrap it up right here because I'm running out of time, but I just wanna say that we came up with 28 recommendations, 33 action steps. And I just wanna say that all of the recommendations we had around collecting data, requiring officers to intervene, to lend assistance, and intervene means if you see an officer abusing somebody, you, as a factor of your responsibility as an officer, you must stop them from doing it. We need to upgrade dispatchers. We came up with 28 recommendations. I can't go through them all, but I will tell you that we got a number of these passed through the legislature this last term, and we're going to keep on pushing because we believe that you can, in fact, improve police-community relationships. We can make sure everybody lives. And one of the most important things we did is we recommended reform in the arbitration system, because a lot of times the chief would fire an officer for repeated bad behavior. That officer would go to an arbitrator and then get put right back on the force. That kind of undermining of the chief makes it hard for the community to keep that officer, keep that chief responsible for making sure that we have not just safety, but we have human rights observed and respected as well. So with that, I want to just wrap up by saying this. I'm so honored to be with the women who are at the very forefront of civil rights, humanitarianism, and goodwill in this country. I've taken more time than I should have, but I just want to let you all know that I'm just so enamored and so impressed by being able to spend a little bit of time with you. I'm on this journey for justice with you, and you all be well. And again, to my friend Marilyn Mosby, all the best, and thank you. I look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you so much, Keith Ellison. He is the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota. You can read more about him. Let's use our phones for information and not for foolishness. I know NCNW members believe in that because there's so much that he said. I took some notes so that when we ask questions at the end, I will be able to ask a couple of questions myself. Thank you so much, Keith Ellison. And now our second spotlight speaker, she is second only in position, not in importance, Marilyn Mosby. She was sworn in as the 25th state's attorney for Baltimore City in 2015. She is the youngest chief prosecutor in any major American city. Marilyn Mosby grew up in inner city Boston. She experienced the tragedy of her honor roll cousin being gunned down in broad daylight outside her home due to mistaken identity. She is a graduate of Tuskegee University, magna cum laude graduate of Tuskegee University, and a graduate of Boston College Law School. Her first job out of law school was the Office of the State's Attorney for Baltimore City, where she eventually prosecuted heinous felonies. She left for a time to go to a Fortune 100 company and then returned in 2000 with the idea in 2013 to run for state's attorney, the head state's attorney. She won that race, defeating an incumbent. Her name became a household known name in 2015, the first year of her term, with the killing of Freddie Gray. You remember Freddie Gray. He was the young man who got a rough ride in a police paddy wagon. And Marilyn Mosby, a young lady, first-time chief prosecutor, had the guts and the courage to prosecute 6 police officers related to the injuries and the ultimate death of Freddie Gray. That was new to most of us. And I've been living a long time, and I don't think I had ever seen that happen until Marilyn Mosby had the courage to prosecute those 6 police officers. She's done so much in the role of state's attorney for the city of Baltimore. She started many initiatives, but one that is so unique, I've never heard of it before, recognizing that prosecutors have the duty to advocate for victims, but also have the duty to seek justice, justice for those who were wrongly arrested and those who were wrongly convicted. She created the Conviction Integrity Unit, unique, to my knowledge, in prosecutors' offices to help exonerate those who are wrongly arrested and wrongly convicted. She is married to Nick J. Mosby, who is a member of the House of Delegates for Maryland, and I understand is running for a different office now. And I believe that he has a very, very good chance of winning that office. They are the parents of 2 daughters. So many accomplishments. I don't want to take up her time telling you about them, but read about Marilyn Mosby on your smartphones. But we're going to hear her live right now. Thank you so much, Marilyn Mosby.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so incredibly honored and privileged to the National Council of Negro Women. Thank you for laying the foundation for me to be in the position that I'm in and for Black women all across this country. I have a special love and appreciation for Dr. Thelma Daley, who has been there for me and my husband through thick and thin since the start of my administration. I have so much love and respect for this woman. I stand on your shoulders, and I only hope to be the bold, beautiful, brilliant woman that you are. I also have to give shout out to Attorney General Ellison. Draining, right? America, where we helped build this country, and yet are often ignored and ending up dead without any sort of accountability. Injustice for Black people in this country is allegedly passing a counterfeit $20 bill during a global pandemic for groceries and having the life sucked out of you as you suffocate for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, sitting in your home eating ice cream, or God forbid, sleeping in your bed 1 minute and ending up dead the next. For Black people in this country, there has always been a refusal to see our humanity based on the color of our skin, but the lack of accountability and injustice is something that we can no longer accept in this time and in this moment. In order to understand what's going on and to truly understand the indifference that some exhibit to the humanity of Black people, the threat that we seem to pose by merely existing, you have to understand the fact that Black people in this country have been dehumanized by the vested powers and the authority of the state in every respect of our existence since we were brought here as slaves. And historically, the police, prosecutors, the courts have been the enforcers of the state, enforcers of the conditions that have dehumanized Black people and kept us oppressed as second-class citizens for centuries. Police, prosecutors, and the courts were the enforcers of quote-unquote, people don't like to talk about it, now they're a little more comfortable, white supremacy. During slavery, when slaves attempted to escape the brutality of it, it was the police and prosecutors and the courts that enforced the slave codes. And even when we abolished slavery with the enactment of the 13th Amendment, America ensured that there was a carve-out except justified dehumanizing the act of slavery for criminals. So police, prosecutors, and courts were once again the enforcers of those that became criminals. During the Civil Rights Movement, it was the police that violently enforced the power and the authority of the state with dogs and fire hoses against children marching for the right to vote, the right to equally exist. During the war on drugs, it was the police, prosecutors, and courts that were the enforcers that imposed mass incarceration and devastation on communities of color. And now, police, prosecutors, and courts are still the enforcers of a system that refuses to see the humanity of Black people. And we're reminded of this fact over and over again as Black boys, Black men, Black women. No matter who and what we are or what we're doing, we are slaughtered over and over again on our iPhones. We see it, it's branded in our minds. So until we acknowledge and come to terms with the violent history of and culture of white supremacy in this, not just in policing, because it exists in policing, but prosecution in the criminal justice system in this country, this culture will never change. So why is it important, which is, I believe, in my opinion, important for us to understand that it's time to move from protest to policy. And it was touched upon earlier by my colleague, but that fundamental right of voting is so critical. What we fail to understand is that our Black lives are literally at risk. And what justice means for Black people in America and our children and grandchildren are literally on the ballot as Trump has today decided to nominate a Supreme Court justice. And the questions that we should be asking, understanding and recognizing that this is going to shift the balance of power on the Supreme Court of the United States that will have an effect not just on you and me, but our children and our grandchildren. Be asking as we get closer to November, is that any candidate for local, state, or national office has to have a platform on criminal justice. What are they saying? Do they recognize the blight of mass incarceration, or do they have punitive approaches to crime? Have they spent their careers fighting to reform the system like my brother, Attorney General Ellison? Have they gone and ensured, right, for the president, but to ensure that they are voting for state attorneys and district attorneys, whatever they may call it in your state. Those local prosecutors make a difference. Attorney generals, they make a difference that will provide us. Those are the individuals that will provide us the justice and the accountability that we as Black people in this country have been seeking for centuries. So I'll open it up to questions in a second. You know, one colleague talked about were some of the solutions. 5 years ago, I was confronted, you know, in my first term, first 4 months of my administration, when an innocent 25-year-old Black man by the name of Freddie Carlos Gray Jr. made eye contact with police. He was unconstitutionally arrested, placed into a metal wagon head first, feet shackled, handcuffed. After his spine was partially severed in the back of that wagon, his pleas for medical attention were ignored. I followed the facts with the law, and I wouldn't do anything differently. That accountability, which wasn't being had, it goes back to that word, accountability, wasn't being had in this country. And as a result of that accountability led to exposure. A week after I charged those officers, the Department of Justice came in, exposed the discriminatory policing practices of the 8th largest police department in the country. That exposure ultimately led to reform. We now have a federally enforceable consent decree that, even despite the Trump administration that tried to forestall it, is still on record. And we can point to tangible reform in place as a direct result of that accountability. Understand that accountability would not exist had the people of Baltimore City, had I not gotten this Selma Daily and those established people in this city who said, no, we want somebody new. We want somebody that's going to apply justice fairly and equally, regardless of sex, race, religion, or occupation. That accountability is what we need in this country when it comes to police and when it comes to race relations in this country, and ensuring that we are eliminating the white rights that ties the police department's hands from getting rid of bad officers. We have to talk about police investigating themselves and how that is not a good formula for a prosecution that is based upon the police investigation. We have to talk about the need for civilians to be on these administrative trial boards, because guess what? They get convicted and then they get off administratively and they still have a job. We have people in Baltimore City that have been convicted. We've convicted 22 police officers since Freddie Gray that have been convicted and are still on the Baltimore City payroll. There are systems in place that prevent accountability, and that's what we have to ensure, that we're getting people in these positions that are going to fight for justice, and so that the system is not just a system that pertains to just us. And so I look forward to the dialogue. I guess the one thing that I would just point out is that, you know, the veil of ignorance has been lifted from Americans in this country regarding race relations and brutality against Black people. And AP put out a poll, and their measure was 5 years ago when I charged the officers in Freddie Gray. And it's, you know, we can now boast in the name of change that Black Lives Matter is no longer a controversial term, which never should have been in the first place. You know, despite the traumatizing taping it, this system existed, and the difference is that it's now being captured, and people can see what our experience has been for African Americans in this country for centuries. And so the blinders have been removed from white America. Denial is no longer a choice, but there are systems in place that must change, and our time to do it is now. So thank you.
Well, I will take the privilege of asking you the first question, State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby. I don't think that a lot of people or a lot of African Americans realize two things: that attorneys general all around the country and chief prosecutors are elected officials. And as you alluded to earlier, we vote those people in and out if we vote. So I'm asking you, Marilyn Mosby, first, emphasize to us how important voting is to a position like yours.
So, I mean, prosecutors are one of the most important stakeholders in the criminal justice system. Prosecutors are the ones who decide who's going to be charged, what they're going to be charged with, what sentence recommendations they're going to make. They make a determination as to whether or not somebody gets into the criminal justice system in the first place. What we need to also understand is that, 95% of the prosecutors making those decisions in this country are white. 79% are white men. As a woman of color, I represent 1% of all elected prosecutors in the country. And what we can see is even my brother here in the George Floyd case, right? We saw the exacerbation of distrust among a community prior to and before my courageous brother stepped to the plate. That local prosecutor actually invoked me as an example as to why he wasn't going to prosecute. And what it did was, after they started burning the police station down, he changed his tune the next day and basically said, well, we're going to evaluate this again. Yeah, I bet so. I bet so. Because that power is something, again, that's the accountability that people want to be assured, that justice is equal, justice is fair. And if you look at Ferguson, and you look at Chicago, you look at these places where the local prosecutor has come out and has not done the right thing, has not done the righteous thing, has done the political expedient, easy thing to do. And let me just tell you, doing this is difficult. Making the right decision and charging police officers, I received hate mail, death threats. I was mocked. I was ridiculed, not just for a period of time before pre-Trump, right, where I had Red Nation Rising and they were threatening me in my office every single day, but even after, to this very day. That is the reason why it still invokes in folks, don't associate yourself. My credibility and my competency was called into question for years as a result of going against and doing what I would not do differently and attempting to get accountability on behalf of an innocent 25-year-old Black man. And the fact that I fought for him. And that's why I say to Attorney General Ellis, this is not easy. Your entire profession is going to be hinged on you doing the right thing and standing up for a Black person in this country and standing against white supremacy. And so it's difficult, but it cannot happen without you all understanding the importance of putting people like me and supporting people once we get here, right? Because the unions and all the other folks, they come for you and they come for me every single day. They did 30 stories on Fox this past month on me. Right? They come for us every day. And so the importance of you all understanding not only to put individuals in these positions that are going to take a holistic approach, as Attorney General Ellison has already talked about, like you got to talk about housing, you got to talk about education, you got to talk about poverty. 28% of Baltimore's population lives in poverty, 35% of children live below poverty. There are over 18,000 vacant houses, 16,000 vacant lots. The unemployment rate for young African-American men between the ages of 18 and 24, which is more than twice that of whites. I've come out and I've said, guess what? I'm not prosecuting marijuana possession. I'm not prosecuting CDS possession. Why? Because I have the power and the ability to limit those interactions that can lead to the loss of life, especially when it's being discriminatorily enforced against poor Black and brown people. And as the state's attorney, the Attorney General, the discretion that we have is that we can never be complicit in the discriminatory enforcement of laws against poor Black and brown people.
Thank you so much. Attorney General Keith Ellison, same question. Emphasize what's the importance.
She said it all.
She didn't say it all. You
what she said. I agree with what that lady said.
Right. And y'all can see me amening over here. But talk to us about the importance of electing an attorney general, electing a chief prosecutor who can see the whole picture and prosecute crimes against us and exonerate us for crimes that we did not commit.
Well, let me just tell you, just talk about criminal justice for a minute. The prosecutor is the one who makes the discharging decisions, decides whether to take the case to the grand jury or decline them or not do them. The prosecutor says, you know what, we're going to make sure that we're investigating what happens to missing and abused Black girls, right? That's reality. Sex trafficked Black girls. We're going to do something about that. We're going to make sure that a woman doesn't have to be afraid to live in her own home because, you know, I mean, these are really important things. And I think that, you know, prosecutors in general, and I'm a prosecutor and Marilyn's a prosecutor, a lot of Black folks think, well, you're putting your own people away. I'm like, well, wait a minute now. What are we supposed to do when the police commit a crime? You want them charged, right? Don't you want to make sure there's nobody above the law and nobody below it? Also, what about Black crime victims? Also, what about Black crime victim reparations? You know, in Minnesota, you know, we represent the Crime Victims Reparation Board. Some Black woman, her son gets killed, and she don't have no money for a funeral or anything, or if she takes off time from work, she can barely even go, you know, she's taking a financial hit. We represent that board to make sure that they're treating her fairly because there is a difference in treatment there too. We found it statistically. Now let me split to the civil side, just to the civil side. Now, so how many African Americans from economic predation? I'm talking about your check cashing, about you know, Comcast charging you more or not even offering you the service. I'm talking about some student loan gangsters taking your money, steering you into some high cost loan. I'm talking about the mortgage crisis, on how, you know, you want to talk about, we talk about Black wealth and the decimation of Black wealth when it came to the mortgage crisis of 2007. That's because they got us into these high cost loan products. And then when the crisis hit, foreclosure hit our community harder than anyone, other than maybe some other brown people. So in the area of civil stuff is very important too, because it's my job to decide, are we going to sue Juul? Now, Juul is a company that is pushing these vaping products, which are healthy for teenagers. You know, if you're an adult, you may want to do it, but at least you ought to know this stuff's bad for you and might give you any number of diseases. So that's what my job is. I decided to sue ExxonMobil, the American Petroleum Institute, and the Koch brothers, Koch Refining, because they were systematically lying about how they were causing climate change. And if you don't know that climate change hits brown people harder, I have two words for you: New Orleans. You know what I mean? And many others, and many others. So my point is that as Attorney General, you know, and County Attorney, you get to make critical decisions involving people's lives. We need to be more plugged into these races than some of the others, to tell you the truth. Oh, and by the way, Marilyn and I we have election certificates. We're not taking orders from the governor. We work with these folk. We work with them, but we work with them, not for them.
That's
and
right.
There's a very big difference. Am I right about that, Marilyn?
You are so right.
That's a huge difference. Now, we have questions from our audience, and I'm not quite sure how it works, but I understand some will be working in it, so that's a good thing. So we open up for questions from our audience. And if our Zoom master will join in.
Yes, here's a question from the audience. Would it be a good position for an individual like myself to stop racial tension when I recognize it? Is there a way to engage safely or set boundaries on my empathy?
Right? Like in that moment, I think it's important. I think it's also really tricky because the president has created so much division in our country. You don't ever want to put yourself in a dangerous situation. But if you're in a situation and when you feel comfortable, and these are maybe your colleagues or in a professional setting or a setting in which you feel like you can make that sort of that check, right? Like you can say, hey, I'm calling you out, and this is how this you have just said this, and I think that it's evoking this. I think that that's appropriate, but I do caution you to be careful because you do have some extremists, and we've seen that play out across the country as, you know, white supremacists are, I think, what they've been deemed one of the #1 sort of terror groups in the country. So you have to really watch it, right? But not be fearful to be able to call things out when you feel that you're safe and able to do so.
Yeah, I think you ought to speak up when you see racial injustice, when you see abuses, I would say don't just confine yourself to the overt expressions, but like when you see systematic and institutional unfairness, you got to speak up on that too. So, yep.
Thank you. Great question. Next question, please.
How do you move past the anger of all the injustice around us? I'm seeing so many things on social media and it's hard not to respond.
And we'll go in that same order.
I think we have to, for me, it's so much greater than me. Like, and I talk kind of about my own sort of personal experience and attempting to apply and have accountability against police officers. But one of the things that I understood and recognized, having gone through all that I did, I mean, they published my children's photos in the paper at the height of my death mail, the hate mail and death threats that we were receiving. You know, they wrote a letter and described how my husband would be killed coming out of my house in an obituary and how no police would respond. It's easy, right, to think about your own personal sort of sacrifice that you make in these situations. But one of the things that always kept me grounded, and to this day still keeps me grounded, is that it's always been bigger than me, right? Like, it was never about Marilyn Mosby. It was about what Marilyn Mosby represented. And after I was elected and after I made the decision, I inspired other Black men to be prosecutors. Aramis Ayala, Kim Fox, Sherry Boston, you know, Kim Gardner, the list goes on. You have Rachel Rollins, right? Like, these were all Black women who were subsequently elected to this role and who are making these major sort of progressive reforms in their respective jurisdictions. And so if you're able to understand, like, it's bigger than you and you're in this fight, the division that we're facing as a country is going to hopefully make us a better country, right? The protests, the Black Lives Matter movement, like, we had to go through and experience pain to turn that pain into passion to pursue our purpose. And so if you think of it that way, like, we're going to be a better country. We may have use of force and de-escalation policies federally, right? Like the police accountability reform that's being proposed federally, statewide. You have to think about the positivity coming out of a very, very tragic sort of circumstance. And so if you can think that way, I think that's what helps me in this moment. But I also understand that it's imperative that we get this individual out of office that is leading our country in the wrong direction.
You know what I'd recommend to people is, one, do not respond to the trolls. You know, if you're on social media, somebody calls you a so-and-so, just either mute them or block them.
And Keith, that's hard to do. That's really hard to do.
The thing is, now, I don't know if you and I can legally block them. We might have to just mute them, right? Because they say if you're an elected official, you might not be able to block these people. But
sometimes I block a whole lot of folks, so we'll see.
Well, you know, but the thing is, better to just mute them or block them. Go and playing verbal tennis with these clowns. Life is short. You got better things to do. So, and then on social media, you know, I would say that, you know, always say something that you feel that is helpful or informative, and kind of keep strict rules to that, because if you're always coming a certain kind of way and those other folks are coming another kind of way, your folks will defend you, right? So I'd say that, you know, there's certain protocols on managing social media, this new world we're living in. It's important to do that. In terms of how I manage this stuff, look, you know what? My grandfather was organizing Black voters in Natchitoches Parish, Louisiana in 1952 and 3. And they threatened to kill him so much that they had to send my mom to boarding school in Lafayette, Louisiana, because they were just that certain that they might try to blow up the house. They burned a cross in front of the house. They refused to sell him gasoline. They call up the house and say, we got that end tied up to a tree. He ain't coming home tonight. And they wouldn't have him there. They just wanted to terrorize my grandmother. That's the kind of people who raised me. So when these folks call me and send me all their little stupid stuff, I'm like, man, whatever, man. I'm easy to find. I just cannot succumb to that, right? And so I have been convinced by my loved ones, that I should take precautions. So I do, but but I don't spend no time staying up at night on these threats from these bullies, and I never will. So that's all I got to say about it.
Thank you. Great question. Are there others?
Yes, for Ms. Mosby or Attorney Mosby, can you speak about the sisterhood of Black female prosecutors and how you have supported each other?
I appreciate that question. I can tell you that it has been a goal of mine, having gone through what I went through in 2015. It can be incredibly isolating, especially when you go up against a system and you represent 1% of all elected prosecutors in the country. You don't necessarily have or feel like you sometimes feel so isolated on an island by yourself. People, don't get me wrong, I had my folks in the communities that would be like, I got your back, I got your back, I got your back. You turn around, you be like, y'all mugs must be way back because I don't see nobody, right? And they put you through the ringer. And so, and it was for a while. But one of the things that I did in that particular sort of situation was that I made a vow to myself, understanding and recognizing that my race and my sex and my age all played into the type of coverage that I was receiving, how, it became all about me as opposed to this innocent 25-year-old man from West Baltimore that made eye contact with police and ended up dead. And so, one of the things that I said was, I want other women to be in this role and to do this type of work, but I don't ever want them to feel as isolated as I do, because it's draining, right? It's a sacrifice. I have two little girls, from being a mom and to my husband who's in politics, like they got the brunt of a lot of the pressures of that job and the pressure of me actually doing and taking the stance that I did. And so, when these Black women prosecutors started getting elected all across the country, I made it a point to reach out to them. I served on Kim Foxx's transition team, and as soon as we found out that additional prosecutors, Black women prosecutors, were going to be elected, we are part of an organization called Fair and Just Prosecution, and as well as the Vera Institute of Justice, actually call us together. We have like a text thread where we vent, we cry, we laugh, we support one another in a way that empowers us to continue to do this type of work. You look at Aramis Ayala, who's the first Black state's attorney in Orlando, Florida, who is receiving a noose to her office, right? Because she came out against the death penalty. And the governor was then ripping away and calling into question her discretion. We together were able to support that sister. You got Kim Gardner. I went out to St. Louis, and at the beginning of the year, this is a sister who's been under attack by the Fraternal Order of Police and the city hall and the mayor. I mean, they have come at her with everything because she attempted to hold the governor accountable and use her discretion, right? And in a way that had one standard of justice. They have done so much to this woman. And then finally, Kim Gardner said, I'm pushing back. Well, I'm sue you and Fraternal Order of Police. And so I went to stand with that sister, and it's so crazy because as soon as I got home, I got this nasty racist voice message that described me as all types of N-word. Sister Stephanie Morales, I got to give her shout out. 2015, she was a sister out of Portsmouth, Virginia, that tried a white police officer, a Black man, and actually got a conviction. This is what we do. We attempt to support one another. And I made that vow when I was going through that experience, that incredibly isolating experience myself.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
I believe those are all the questions.
Well, I have a million questions, but I won't get to ask all of them tonight. I think in general, African-American people don't understand that every case that is charged is not prosecuted. And that might be a factor in their realizing how important your role as state's attorney and your role as attorney general are. In my experience, way back in the 1400s, when I was an assistant prosecutor, most cases in South Carolina were not prosecuted. And the person who made the decision whether to prosecute a case or whether not to prosecute a case was what we call a solicitor or state's attorney or assistant state's attorney. And since 25 of the state's attorneys in the office where I work were white and 2 were Black, the white people got the breaks. The elected official was white and 25 of the assistants who worked for him were white. The white people got the breaks. But when Black people, 2 of us, and I think there's like 1 or 2 now, 25 years later, 30 years later, we could see a picture where a Black person might need a break, not just need a break, but deserve a break. Talk about the prosecutor's role and discretion in determining who is prosecuted and how they are prosecuted.
So the one thing I can say, and I kind of already briefly mentioned it, right, is that power, that awesome amount of discretion. 95% of those individuals making those decisions are white in this country right now in this moment, right? Mm-hmm. And so their life experiences are vastly different than, you know, the 1%, the Black women. I don't need cultural sensitivity and implicit bias training to know how young boys like Freddie Gray were treated by police in not just Baltimore, but all across every municipality across the nation. But that power and that discretion, because it's been yielded for white men, especially, white people overall, but white men especially, that discretion is often challenged when it is non-white, right? And I'm sure Attorney General Ellison is dealing with this now. They challenge that in a way that, again, they call into question. For me, as a Black woman, the first thing they do is they call into question your competency, which is crazy. Not the systems that are preventing police accountability, not the fact that a grand jury has agreed that we have probable cause that these individuals have committed an offense. Once you recognize that that's always going to be the issue, and for me, I feel like they created the playbook and they perfected it. They created a playbook with me and then perfected it with everybody else. You can't, I'm not accountable. As Keith has already said, I'm not accountable to the governor. I'm not accountable to the mayor or a city council. I am accountable to the people who have elected me, right? And they have elected me because they believe in my judgment and the power of my judgment. So when the state delegates and the governor come out against me, when I look at the ACLU reports and they understand and recognize that when the possession of marijuana in the United States, you're 4 times more likely to be arrested if you're Black, right, for possession of marijuana than a white person. There's no disparate use among white and Black people when it comes to using that drug, but there's disparate sort of impact on the enforcement and putting people in jail. In Baltimore City, you were 6 times more likely to be arrested for possession of marijuana. And then even we decriminalized 10 grams or less in this state. When you look at the data, the first year that we decriminalized it, 89% of the citations that they were issuing were issued to Black people. Right. 2017, 94%. The following year, 95% of the citations that they were issued to Black people. And what was even more troubling was the fact that we have 9 police district arrests because you've been focusing on him and not anybody else. I've come out during COVID and said, we have to, after consulting with the experts, legal experts, and said we have to ensure that we are depopulating our prisons and our jails so that we can actually hold the violent individuals there, right? We're creating an environment where you have what is his name? Loose cigarette. He lost his life over a loose cigarette.
Eric Garner.
Eric Garner lost his life over a loose cigarette. Sandra Bland over not putting on a turn signal, right? Like, we have got to reevaluate the way that we're using and policing in this country. And as prosecutors, we have that discretion to do that.
And you're an elected official. Yes.
Let me just say that, Marilyn has very correctly pointed on the initial contact people have with police, but prosecutors have a lot of discretion on the back end too. I mean, when it comes to exonerees, Black people are convicted of murder and sexual assault significantly more likely than their white counterparts to be found innocent later, right? So the exoneree, the fact is, because are targeted for criminal law and criminal justice enforcement, the cases they are contacted more. The cases are statistically, weaker. Not that they're weak on everyone, but like overall. And then that means there's more Black exonerees. And so, but like, you've got to be the kind of person who's going to have a conviction integrity unit. I'm following in Maryland's good example. We just started a conviction integrity unit at the Minnesota Attorney General's office, like just 2 weeks ago. We got the money for it. We're rocking. And so my point is that is another phenomenon. People who have the criminal justice system has failed, like say the Central Park Five. How many folks didn't do it, but there's a mass hysteria. Somebody gets charged, somebody gets arrested, somebody gets convicted. And are they ever going to get their post-conviction relief that they should get? That is also something within discretion. Do you fight the thing to the last, or do you say, okay, wait a minute, let's at least retry it if there's some doubt? And so these are other critical issues that folks need to consider. How many people in America, including Black people, have somebody in prison and their family who they're like, I just know they didn't do that. I got people over here saying that they were over here, but nobody's listening. So that's another piece of this that does involve discretion. As Attorney General, again, we've talked a lot about criminal justice. I also want to say the discretion to confront economic predators, yes, and stop the draining of the African-American family budget, from just fraudsters and crooked practices. And, this is another thing that is a discretionary matter. We sue who we decide to sue, and right now I can tell you this, we're looking at the fact that so many Black women do not get adequate prenatal care. They don't get the vitamins, they don't get the checkups, and then, there's this really epidemic of Black women dying in childbirth. Infant, women dying in childbirth, disproportionately African-American. And, the system, the healthcare system says, well, these are non-compliant people. They smoke their way too much. There's all these problems. Well, wait a minute. First of all, is that even true? Because I challenge the truth of that. And then even if in some cases it is true, what do you do to lose weight? What are you doing? Where do you have smoking cessation programs in this community or only over there, right? So these are all things even know that they can call us if they feel their landlord is ripping them off, if they feel that they're being cheated, if they, we need to know from a consumer, we do a lot of consumer protection. We need to help people understand that we are available to them. So we've been putting a lot of energy into making sure they are aware. That's a matter of discretion. Because if we're not in the Black community, if we're not on the Native American reservation, if we're not in the where the Somali community is, well, they're getting ripped off and nobody even knows where to turn. So there's a lot of discretion we have. So one more reason why these races are key for our community.
Well, thank you so much. I need to ask the conveners if we have a little more time, or do we have to stop now? We started a little late, but I know you have a program that needs to keep moving forward. And I promise you, I got more questions. I see some little bobbing heads. I think this might be the end for us. I want to thank you, Keith Ellison, Attorney General for the state of Minnesota. Thank you, Marilyn Mosby, State's Attorney for the Baltimore City. Thank you for your service, your quest for justice, for your effectiveness, and thanks for running, because a whole lot of people wouldn't do it. But we appreciate you. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and we're glad that you're fighting on our side. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our NCNW members, conveners, participants, Dr. Cole, and all the staff. Thank you. Good night.
Before you close out, I would like to say just a word of thanks we were remiss in not introducing you when you began this. You did a wonderful job moderating, and we appreciate it.
Oh,
Davita Mathis is an attorney with decades. She was the first Black female prosecutor in the state of South Carolina. She's since been in private practice. She's an accomplished musician and actress, and I think sometimes one of the reasons she's such a good lawyer is because she was such a good actress. She's a graduate of Oberlin College, graduate of the University of South Carolina School of Law, and of course, some of you may have guessed this. Marilyn Mosby, we love you, we thank you, we appreciate you. Keith Ellison, it's been a while since we've seen each other. Thank you for doing this. But now it is my honor and privilege to introduce somebody who needs no introduction. Marilyn, as you said, especially in Baltimore, in Maryland, or anywhere on the East Coast, she is the vice president of our organization. She is the 16th National